Hello, everybody. It is 3 p.m. Eastern Time. So I'm going to start today's webinar, the error rate training for Year 3 states on successfully completing reviews and the ACF-404 report. I am Katie Watts with the National Center on Subsidy Innovation and Accountability. And we have a lot to cover today. We have 90 minutes scheduled. Hopefully we will not need that time, but we have it built in just in case, because like I said, there's a lot to go through. Before I start introductions, I wanted to address a couple of logistical matters. First, if you take a look at the bottom of the slide, you'll see two email addresses, Heidi and Beth. And they're both colleagues of mine. They are here to address any technical issues that might come up for you. Hopefully there will not be any, but if you lose audio, if you get kicked off, anything, just take note of these email addresses and you can get in touch with them. If you have technical issues too, you can also put a note in the chat box and we can help. I did send out the slides and a few handouts. I sent that email about an hour ago, so if you've just registered in the last hour, I guess you did not get them. You can follow up with me after the webinar and I'll make sure you get them, or again, you can send an email to Heidi or Beth and one of them will get them out to you. But the handouts included a copy of the data collection instructions, the OLDC access request form, as well as a ACF-404 tip sheet. And since I mentioned the data collection instructions, and like I said, that's included in the handouts, some of you might have heard that we've recently revised the data collection instructions. That revision was just approved recently. The revision includes a few updates and changes to the error rate submissions. So I want to be super clear that the Year 3 states are to refer to the prior DCI, the one that you've already been using, the one that I sent out with the handouts. That is the one you are to be using in completing your ACF 404 report. So if for whatever reason you have a copy of the new DCI, you can kind of put that aside for now. You are not using that version yet. If you do want to take a look at the revisions, it's not been posted yet to the Office of Child Care website, but hopefully it will be in the near future. So I just really want to avoid any confusion. We're not, making everyone use a new 404 at the last minute. And finally, I think that's it for logistics, but if you have any questions, please put your question in the chat box and we will stop at a few points throughout the webinar to address questions. Again, I'm Katie Watts. I'm the error rate lead with the National Center on Subsidy Innovation and Accountability, or ncisa. I have with me 3 program specialists from OCC, the Oversight and Accountability Division. They are Adi Fitcher, Penny Job, and Linda Winings. They are all child care program specialists, and they are here just if we get some tough questions that I don't know the answer to. And welcome to all of the ACF regional office staff that are on. And of course, welcome to all of you from Year 3 states. We're so glad that you are here with us. All right, we're going to start out the webinar with some background information on the error rate review. The bulk of our time will be spent walking through the ACF 404 report, or State Improper Payment Report is the other name for it, and that must be submitted by June 30th, about a month from now. The ACF 404 report is submitted in the Online Data Collection System, or OLDC for short. And I'll spend a few minutes going through some tips on using the OLDC. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it because most of you or a lot of you are probably already familiar with the OLDC since it was used to submit your SDAP. And then we'll close out with some next steps and TA available for the Year 3 states. I wanted to share some background or context on why we do the error rate review and why the Office of Child Care collects ACF-404 data from states. And some of you might be familiar with this already, but I haven't included this background in a cohort training in a long time. So this slide breaks down the two components that make up the error rate review authority. First, there's the broader law governing executive branch agencies. And second, how OCC implements the requirements through CCDF regulations. The Payment Integrity Information Act of 2019, or PIIA, requires executive branch agencies to review all programs and identify those that may be susceptible to significant improper payments. Because CCDF is a program that has been identified as susceptible to improper payments, OCC is required to calculate and publish an annual national error rate and identify reduction targets, implement corrective actions, and reduce improper payments. CCDF regulations in 45 CFR 98, subpart K, that specifically outlines the error rate reporting requirements for states, including the 404 report, which of course is why we are here today. So that's some background. That error rate process includes a number of steps. Your cohort, the Year 3 cohort, is almost to the end of our timeline. We're right here at the second to last row. As I stated a moment ago, the State Improper Payments Report, or the 404, is due on June 30th of this year. All right, one more background slide. This is just a list of frequently used acronyms in the error rate review. I'm not going to read through all of it, but it may be helpful for you just to keep and refer to as needed. I'm going to try and specify the meanings of acronyms at least the first time I use them, but if at any point I use an acronym and you're not sure of its meaning, please put a note in the chat and we'll make sure to clarify. So that's it for our background info. Now we'll move on to the main part of our webinar, which again is on completing each item of the ACF-404 report. And the 404 report consists of 3 parts. First, we have program assurances and certifications. Then part 2 is error measures, which is the numbers, the quantitative measures. And finally, part 3 consists of narrative responses. So let's start at the beginning, part 1, which again is the assurances and certifications. And this is the easiest part of the report to complete. This is a screenshot from the template just to show you what is included in part 1. I'm not going to read it all here, but it is, again, a list of the assurances. What you need to know is that in the OLDC, the fields that you are seeing on the right will be pre-populated for you. The certifier will just need to click on a link to e-sign. A couple of pointers or things to keep in mind. Even though this is part 1, when you're doing this in the OLDC, it's actually the last thing you'll do. So after you've completed parts 2 and 3, this is like the last thing you do before you submit. The other thing is that sometimes some of these fields, I said they're pre-populated, sometimes some of them are blank. Um, Especially like the email address doesn't always pre-populate. If that happens, don't worry, we still have all of your information. The only time you would want to let us know is if something is like blatantly wrong, like it's the wrong state or something. That's never happened. Hopefully it won't. But if it does, just please let us know so we can fix that. All right, so that was part one. Again, that's pretty straightforward. So we will go on to part two, the error measures, but I just saw a question that came in about the assurances and certifications. So the question is, what if there's a staffing change? And I'm guessing that you mean like the name that you see pre-populated is not the person that is the, okay. I think in this case, we could I'm sorry, I'm going to put OCC on the spot because I don't want to say something that's wrong. Adi or Penny or Linda?
I think I could jump in. Oh, or Adi, did you want to answer?
Go ahead, Linda.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think timing would have a lot to do with it. So if you have submitted your document and then you have a staffing change after that, and you have still already submitted. But I think what I'm hearing is that if the name is different when you do the e-sign, but as long as the person who is certified and submitting has an account and has access, that's the only way that they'll be able to actually do the e-sign. So there really should not be a different name showing up in that place. If you do have a change in the person who can certify and submit, you'll need to have that person apply and to sign up to get access. And then their name, when they click e-sign, then their name will show up. So I can't imagine that actually happening, that one person is trying to certify and submit and then another person's name is there, if I'm understanding the question. And please let me know if I didn't answer your question. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
Sure.
And we will, towards the end of the webinar, talk a little bit more about OLDC getting access, if there are staffing changes, things like that. But it looks like that answered your question. So thank you again, Linda. So yeah, we will be moving to part two, the error measures. And before we dive into the items, before we start going through the items, I'm going to take a step back and show you one of the elements in the record review worksheet, element 500. And if you have been conducting reviews or if you were involved in creating your state's record review worksheet, this probably looks familiar. If you are not as familiar with the record review worksheet, I'll quick explain it. For each of the 276 case record reviews that are completed, the reviewer enters their findings into the record review worksheet, element 500, column 2, and a coding scheme is used here. In item 1, the reviewer records whether the case had an error. In item 2, they record whether that error, if there was one, was caused by missing or insufficient documentation. Items 2A through 2E ask for some more information about missing or insufficient documentation errors, if there are any. Item 3 is where the reviewer would record whether any error resulted in an overpayment or underpayment. Item 4 is the amount of the improper payment if there was one. And then item 5 is the total payment amount for the sample month. So the reason I'm showing this to you before we start with the 404 items is because the information that you entered here in element 500 forms the basis for many of the items in part 2 of the 404 report. So you will be reviewing these, tallying them up, a lot of these figures in the 500, the element 500 of the record review worksheet. When I'm walking through the different 404 items in the next few slides, I will be referencing element 500 a lot. Okay, so now I'll start with the 404 items, and as I go through, I will use some hypothetical numbers as examples. Starting with item 1, this is the total number of cases reviewed, and this is set at 276. So this will be 276 for everyone. Item 2 asks for the total number of cases with an error, and this means any error, not just those causing an improper payment. To determine this figure, you'll need to refer to your completed record review worksheets and tally up the total number of cases that have a 1 entered in element 500, number 1. We'll say our state had 45 cases with an error. And then item 3 is the percentage of cases with an error. And this is determined by taking what you just entered for item 2 and dividing it by item 1. So in this case, it would be 45 divided by 276, which is 16.3%. When you are entering into the OLDC, this math is done for you. And I'm going to quick show you what this looks like in the OLDC so I can kind of demonstrate how the entering and auto-calculating works. All right. So this is the 404 report in the OLDC. This is item 1, 2, and 3, the ones that I just went through. So for item 1, like I said, that is set at 276. We'll say we had 45 cases with an error. And then looking at item 3, percentage of cases with an error, you're not able to enter anything. So you would just go and hit save. And scroll back down and you can see that that auto calculation is complete. So I would suggest, and we do suggest hitting the save button a lot because this doesn't automatically save for you. Just hitting the save button whenever there's an auto calculation just to make sure that everything checks out okay. Item 4 in the 404 report asks for the total number of cases with an improper payment. And this is the total number of cases with a number other than 0 in your record review worksheets, element 500, number 4. Number 4 again, in element 500 is where the improper payment amount is captured. So if that amount is going to be anything other than 0, then that case would be included in this tally. And this tally should not include any potential improper payments that were mitigated through an additional inquiry. And our state had 19 cases with an improper payment. Item 5 asks for the percentage of cases with an improper payment, which is determined by dividing the number of cases with an improper payment by the total number of cases. This is another item that will be auto-calculated for you in the OLDC. And we have in our example a percentage of cases with an improper payment of 6.88%. And then number 6 is asking for the total number of cases with an improper payment due to missing or insufficient documentation, or MID. And like in item 4, we want to make sure that you're only including those improper payment errors that remained after any mitigation. So do not include any mitigated errors here. And you'll tally up the number of cases that had a Y in element 500, number 2 of your record review worksheets, and also had that number other than 0 in number 4. So this is going to be like a subset of your total number of cases with an improper payment. And in our example state, we'll say there were 4 cases with an improper payment error due to mid. Now the next few items get into some additional questions about missing or insufficient documentation errors. 7A asks for the total number of mid potential improper payment errors. Now, this is different from the last few items. Here, we're not asking about the number of cases, but the number of errors. So sometimes a case can have more than one error in it. In this count, we want to make sure that you're including all of your mid potential improper payment errors, including those that were mitigated and those that were not. So the figure that you enter here can be found by summing up the figures, again in your record review worksheet, element 500, number 2A. Our state had 10 mid-potential improper payment errors. 7B represents the sum of the potential improper payments resulting from mid-errors. So this is the dollar figure before any additional inquiry mitigations. And it's the sum of the figures recorded in element 500, number 2B of your record review worksheets. You would apply the pooling factor here if pooled funds were used. Our state identified $2,646 in potential improper payments resulting from mid-errors. You might notice here, and in all of the items that ask for dollar amounts, everything is rounded to the nearest whole number. When you're working in the OLDC, if you enter dollars and cents, they will be automatically rounded for you. On to item 8. 8A is asking for the total number of mid-potential improper payment errors that were mitigated using the additional inquiry. And this is found by summing element 500, number 2D of your record review worksheets. In our example state, there were 5 mid-potential improper payment errors that were mitigated. And 8B is the total dollar amounts that were mitigated, which is the total of the figures recorded in element 500, number 2E of your worksheets. And similar to 7B on the last slide, you will want to apply the pooling factor here if pooled funds were used. And our state had $1,245 of payments mitigated. Moving on to item 9. For 9A, you'll enter the total number of mid-errors that the total number of mid-errors resulting in an improper payment that could not be mitigated. So this is actually just 7A minus 8A, and it's calculated automatically for you in the OLDC.
Katie, there's a question in the chat.
Okay. Thank you for letting me know.
Yep.
Charmaine, thank you for the question. I will address it as soon as I'm done with this slide. I don't want to lose my train of thought. Right, so in our example state, there were 10 potential mid improper payment errors. We said 5 were mitigated in the last slide, so we're left with 5 that could not be mitigated. So that is 9A. And 9B asks for the total dollar amount of mid improper payments that could not be mitigated. And this is going to be 7B minus 8B. And again, it is calculated for you in the OLDC. So we have $1,401 in mid improper payments that were not mitigated. Okay, thank you for your patience, Charmaine. I will address your question now. And you asked, what is the difference between item 2? Are you asking item 2 in the 404, not like number 2 on the record review worksheets, right? Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. I want to make sure I'm answering the right thing. So the question is, what is the difference between items 2 and 4 on the 404 report? So in item 2, this is asking for your total number of cases with an error. So this is going to be any error. So if you had some cases that maybe had an error, but it did not result in an improper payment, so like administrative error, those cases would all be included in this count. And then looking at item 4, this is just asking for those cases that had an improper payment. So this is going to be like, again, like a subset of the number that you entered in item 2. So again, item 2 is any error, regardless of whether it resulted in an improper payment. Item 4 is just those that had an improper payment. I hope that answers your question. And while we're on questions, I had another one come in, and this is a good one. Do we enter the pooling factor into OLDC and it auto calculates, or do we calculate it ourselves? So Laura, that is going to be something you will need to calculate yourself. There's nothing in the OLDC where you would enter the pooling factor. You have to do the math first and then go ahead and enter it in the OLDC. You're welcome. And I did have a follow-up from Charmaine regarding items 2 and 4, and you asked, would that include under and overpayments? Your tally in item 4, total number of cases with an improper payment, that does include both underpayments and overpayments. Okay, so I will move back to the 404 items, and this actually was a good time to take some questions because at this point in the 404 report, we move away from all the mid items and back to thinking about all of your case review findings. Item 10 asks for the total amount of payments for the sampled cases. And again, you will refer to your record review worksheets and sum the amounts that were entered in element 500, number 5. And you would again apply the pooling factor here, if applicable. And we have for our example state $124,850 in payments for the sampled cases. Item 11 is the total amount of improper payments for the review period, and this is the gross amount of underpayments and overpayments. This can be found by summing up the amounts entered in element 500, number 4 of your record review worksheets. But it is actually calculated for you in the OLDC by summing up the totals for the next two items, which I'll show you, 11A and 11B. And we had 2825 in the total amount of improper payments, which again is summed up based on what you entered for 11A and 11B. 11A is asking for the total amount of underpayments, which you will find by summing up the amounts in element 500, number 4 of the record review worksheets, for only those that also have a U in element 500, number 3, and apply the pooling factor. So here's, you're just going to add up your amount of underpayments from your record review worksheets. And here we had $75 in underpayments. And in 11B, you will do the same, but for overpayments. Sum the amounts entered in element 500, number 4, but for only those cases that have an O entered in element 500, number 3. And again, apply the pooling factor if applicable. And the example state had $2,750 in overpayments. And again, these two figures are then automatically added up together to get your sum for item 11. Jumping to item 12, this is the percentage of the total amount of payments for the sampled cases that are improper payments. And this is going to be what we refer to as your state's error rate. It's calculated by dividing item 11, which again is your total amount of improper payments, by item 10, which is your total amount of payments for the sampled cases. This is calculated for you in the OLDC, and our state had 2.26% here. Again, this is the error rate. So if this response would have been above 10%, the state would have been required to submit a corrective action plan. Next, item 13 is the average amount of improper payments. It's another one that is calculated for you, but if you want to look at the math, this is dividing item 11, the total amount of improper payments, by item 4, which is the number of cases that have an improper payment. Our example state had an average amount of improper payments of $148. Moving on to 14A, this is your total amount of subsidy payments made using CCDF funds over the 12-month review period. And this is for all children, not just the sample. So this is not something you can pull from your record review worksheets. In your SDAPs, there's an item where you would record your plans for finding this number, so you might want to go back and refer to that if you're not sure. But in general, it's going to be a pretty big number. So we'll say in our state, it was just over $54 million. Again, that's all of the CCDF subsidy payments from the 12-month review period. And then 14B is the estimated annual amount of improper payments. To get this figure, we take the error rate that we calculated in item 12 and multiply it by the figure that was entered in 14A. This is another one where the math is done for you, and we end up with $1,226,057 in our example. Right. Moving on to item 15. I know there's a lot of text here, but it's basically asking whether or not you used a pooling factor. You'll have to check either A, B, or C. If your review was not based on a sample drawn from pooled funds, then you'll choose A. If your review was based on a sample drawn from pooled funds and you applied the pooling factor from your most recent ACF-800, you would check B. And then you would also need to refer to these three questions, provide the number and percentage of cases that used pooled funds. And in most cases, it's going to be all of your sampled cases, 276, 100%, but not always. In some states, only a portion of your sample cases used pooled funds. If that's the case, then we would ask you to complete B3, which asks you to describe which cases use the pooling factor and why. Now, if you used a pooling factor that was different from the one you gave in your most recent ACF 800, then you would check C and take a look at these 5 items. You would let us know what your pooling factor is, explain how you came up with it, give your number and percentage of cases that used pooled funds, and if not all of the cases used pooled funds, then describe which cases did use it and why. And we do go back and take a look at your plans for using the pooling factor that you reported in your STAP. And if there's a difference, like if you said in your STAP you will use a pooling factor, but then here you checked A that you didn't, we'll go back to you just to get clarification on that. So if there has been a change to how you've used and applied the pooling factor, you can get in touch with your regional office program specialist ahead of time just to give us a heads up that that's changed. And item 16 asks for some information on any replacement cases that were used. As a reminder, you must receive approval from the regional office before using a replacement case. And if you did use replacement cases, please double check that you have that approval. If you did not get it, just let your regional office program specialist know as soon as possible. Otherwise, there may be a delay in us being able to review and approve your 404 report. So for the sake of space, I'm only displaying 2 months from the template, but if you do look at the template, it has all 12 months listed. We'll say that our state had a replacement case in October because it was discovered that no payment was actually made in the sample month, and there was one case replaced that month. Now, when you're in the OLDC, there's space to record the month of the replacement case, the reason, and the number of times the reason was used. There's a list of reasons pre-populated. Actually, I'm just going to show you. So I'm going to scroll down here. Sorry, the text is kind of small, but item 16 is the replacement case. And there's a drop down for the month of the review period. There's a drop down for the reason. And there's a few that are pre-populated. If it's something else, you would just select other and type in the reason. Number of times reason used, we'll say 1. And then that's that. If you need to add another replacement case, then you can just click this add button. If you need to add, a bunch of replacement cases, then you can, choose 3 or whatever number it is and click add. and then those lines will show up for you. If you made a mistake and you need to delete a row, you can just click the button here and click delete marked rows. And there are a few other items on the 404 once we get into the narrative items that are kind of set up the same way in the OLDC in like a table format where you can add rows, delete rows. So that's kind of how that works in the OLDC. And that takes us to the end of the part 2 of the 404 report. I don't think there are any questions at the moment. So I'm going to move on to part 3, the narrative responses. And this section gives you an opportunity to tell us what happened during your error rate review, what you found, what you learned, and what you'll plan to do to improve your processes. Your responses here are helpful for us. We do read them all. The information helps us to improve our training and technical assistance. And we also use this information in our federal reporting about the national error rate. So this stuff is just as important as the numeric data that you give us in part 2. The first of the narrative items, 17, asks the following. Describe lessons learned or improvements made in implementation of the review process during the current review cycle. Some of the things you can do here is describe what you learned as you implemented your SDAP. What did you do differently this cycle that was different from last cycle? Anything that might have changed? Anything unexpected, and so on. Be detailed here, and you can discuss any challenges that you face, but also you can look at it as an opportunity to spotlight your work and what went well. Feel free to brag a bit. If you think that you had a really, smooth process and you are happy with the results, we want to hear the good news too. In item 18, you'll be providing some information about those potential improper payment errors due to missing or insufficient documentation. And you must provide this information for all potential improper payment errors due to MID, regardless of whether an additional inquiry was used and regardless of whether it was mitigated. So there's a lot of parts to this item, but the good news is that it's pretty easy to set up. Everything can be pulled from your MID tables. Okay, so I'm not going to read this here. I'm going to show you in the next slide. This is how item 18 is set up. Again, it's like a table, like in the replacement case item. The columns displayed are columns A through F. Each row represents a separate MID potential improper payment error. Column A just asks for the element number, and column B asks what was the MID. And your responses here can be pulled from column 2 of your MID tables. And I want to quick show you the MID table just to illustrate what I mean. This is not a completed MID table, it's just the template. But column 2 of the MID table says to describe the documentation that was missing or insufficient. So whatever you entered here, you can just kind of copy it and paste it over into your 404 report here in column 2. Column C is asking for the dollar amount of the potential improper payment, and this corresponds to column 3 in your MID table. And column D corresponds to columns 4, 5, and 6 of the mid-table. So let me again show you what I mean here. I'm going to pull up the mid-table template again. Looking at items 4, 5, and 6, 4 is just a yes or no item. Is there an additional inquiry that can be made to mitigate the error? And if the reviewer says no, then in column 5, they would describe why not. If the reviewer answers yes, then they would complete column 6 and describe the additional inquiry. So based on how you answered these columns in your mid-table, that is what you would enter here in column D. If you used the additional inquiry, you would just say yes and then copy and paste over what you entered in column 6 of your mid-table. If you did not use an additional inquiry, then you could say no and copy what you had in column 5 of the mid-table. Column E is the amount mitigated. You only have to enter this if you actually used an additional inquiry. And this corresponds to column 8 of the mid-table. And then column F asks you to explain how you determined whether or not the potential improper payment could be mitigated. And this is taken from column 9 of the mid-table, again, only if you did do an additional inquiry. So I'll show you a couple of examples to illustrate all of this that I just described. First, let's pretend that one of our worksheets had a potential improper payment error caused by mid in element 330. And just walking through the different columns, we have element 330. What was the mid? The child citizenship verification. The dollar amount was $510. Going to column D, this description contacted vital records. That would have been pulled from column 6 of the mid-table. $510 was mitigated. And then there's a brief description that vital records provided the birth certificate. And then in the next row, I just have an example where there was no additional inquiry. Only the first 4 columns are filled in here. We have the element number, a description of what was missing, the dollar amount, and then they say no, AI was not used because the parent does not participate in any other programs, which would have been copied over from column 5 of the mid-table. And again, columns E and F are left blank here because there was no additional inquiry. When you're in the OLDC, this is, again, a table just like the item on replacement cases where you can add rows to it or delete rows if you added something in error. Before we move on to item 19, I want to draw your attention to this big yellow box. Please just double check to make sure that all of your mid potential improper payment errors are included in your response to item 18. So the number of rows that you have in item 18 should equal whatever figure that you entered back in 7A. All right, item 7A, if we go back a few slides, this is asking for your total number of mid errors with identified potential improper payments. And we are asking for all of these errors to be accounted for in item 18. So here we had 10 mid errors with potential improper payments, so there would be 10 rows in item 18. And then thinking about mitigated versus non-mitigated errors, we would expect those figures to line up with what you entered in item 8A and then in 9A. So just take a second look at this before you submit it. It can be a bit tricky just to make sure that everything lines up. If you want us to take a look at your report before you submit it, we are able to kind of see what you've entered in the OLDC. So just let us know and we're happy to go in and take a look. This is also all included in that 404 tip sheet that I included with the handouts. So you can also refer to that. It has a little bit more information on completing 18. But again, don't hesitate to reach out to us if you want us to just double check, because like I said, it's tricky to just make sure everything lines up. Okay, so that was 18. In item 19, you're asked to identify all of your improper payment error causes. For each error cause, you're going to name what that cause is, give us the number of cases, an example of the error, and whether it was caused by MID or not. So this is how it's set up in the OLDC. It's another table format item. Each row represents one error cause. So as an example, we'll say that in our state, there was 10 cases that had income miscalculation errors. So that is listed as the cause. They had 10 cases. There's just a really quick example of what happened. And then they indicated that no, it's not caused by MID. And then in the next line, we have incorrect provider rate with 4 cases, a brief example, and again, not caused by MID. So, and then I just have 2 more. These are both MID errors, missing work verification, missing income verification. So that just kind of gives you an idea of what item 19 might look like after you enter everything into it. But we do have a couple of important tips on completing item 19. This is another one that, again, might be a bit tricky to make sure that, everything aligns. So our first tip is in the box on the left. When it comes to your mid-error causes in item 19, you can use what you entered back in 18 to help guide your responses. Since you have a list of all of your mid-errors in item 18, just take a look at those that were not mitigated, and you can use those to kind of help come up with what your error causes are in 19. That makes sense. And again, this is included on the tip sheet too. If you have a large number of mid-errors, we do encourage you to reach out for TA on completing this item. And also, you'll need to do a little bit of cross-checking, or we encourage you to do a little bit of cross-checking before you submit. And this is taking a look at the box on the right. I say that the sum of all cases in item 19 should be greater than or equal to the number of improper payment cases entered in item 4. So I know that's a lot of words and it may or may not make sense, but I'll expand on it a bit. Item 4, I'll quick jump back. That's the total number of cases with an improper payment. So say that our example state had 19 cases with an improper payment. Therefore, we would expect there to be at least 19 errors. If a case has more than one error within it, which sometimes happens, then there would be more than 19 errors. Taking another look at item 19, we would want you to sum up this second column and compare it to what you have in item 4. In this case, it adds up to, I believe, 19, which matches exactly what we had in item 4. Again, if some cases have more than one error within them, then this number might end up being greater than that, what you have in item 4. But if it's less than item 4, we will end up having to go back to just to clarify what's going on there. But the bottom line is that there should be some alignment there between those two items, what's in 19 and what's in 4. This is also all written out on the tip sheet in hopefully a more easy to digest format. But again, like I've said before, if you have your draft in the OLDC and you would like us to take a look at it, don't hesitate to reach out to us and we're happy to do that. Okay. Now, hopefully the rest of the items in part 3 are a little more straightforward. Item 18 asks again for a list of the error causes, and here you will give your plans for reducing error. You'll describe your planned action steps, the timeline for implementing the action steps, and the method or methods that you'll use to measure progress and impact of the action steps. In the next slide, I'll show you how this item is set up in the OLDC. It's another table. The first column just numbers the errors like 1, 2, 3, and so on. The next column, cause of error, will auto-populate based on what you entered in item 19, the previous item. If you're working in the OLDC and your error causes are not showing up here in 20, try just hitting save, and then hopefully it doesn't, again, you have to save it before it'll auto-populate for you. The next column is action steps, and here we ask you to share specific activities that you're planning to help reduce the error. If you have multiple action steps for an error cause, you might want to number them. That makes your response look much cleaner and easier to read. And in this example, you can see the state identified 3 specific action steps to address income calculation errors. In the next column, timeline, we want you to share when the action steps will be taken and when you anticipate they'll be complete. And if you have multiple action steps, again, we would ask you to use the numbering system to kind of line up what you have in the timeline column and the action step column. And then finally, in the column for progress measurement, describe how you'll track the completion of your action steps and whether they're having the desired effect in reducing the error. And in this example, again, numbering was used to align everything. I'll give you a quick, give you a moment to read through this if you want. But we really do like to see this to be really specific and really specific to what the cause of the error is. This is one of the items that we go back to the state a lot and ask, well, can you give us a bit more detail? So we do encourage you to be detailed here. Here's a few pointers for item 20, which I might have already said all of these on the previous slide, but again, we highly recommend numbering action steps, timelines, and progress measurement if you do have multiple action steps for the error cause. Ensure the action steps are directly tied to the error causes. And similarly, ensure that the timeline and progress measurements all tie back to the action steps. Try to be specific as possible. And finally, if any of the error causes this cycle were also error causes last cycle, make sure you think about what you might do differently this cycle to address them. Moving on to item 21, this is two parts. For 21A, enter the amount of improper payments from this review that are expected to be recovered. And the amount given here should not be more than the amount of overpayments that you report in item 11B. If you expect to recover less than the total amount of overpayments, that's fine, but we just ask you to describe why. And when thinking about determining your recovery estimate, consider your history of collecting overpayments and any state laws that might limit the collection amount. And in 21B, enter the amount that was collected as a result of the previous review. If it was less than the amount that you expected to recover, then describe why. And you will need to refer to 21A on your last report from 2022 to see what that expected amount was. And also the amount entered here should not exceed the amount of overpayments from your last 404. Item 22 is where you'll describe your information systems and other infrastructure that assist in identifying and reducing improper payments. So we're thinking about systems here that help with eligibility, such as those that interface with other programs. You can also think about including details about automated systems that profile or highlight potential errors or improper payments. Systems that have capabilities for ongoing reports or ad hoc reports, worker alerts. You can also describe any limitations that you might have with your current technology. You certainly do not have to. If you have plans to acquire additional systems or upgrade, you can also share that here in this item. All right, moving along to item 23. Here you'll provide findings and targets from both the current cycle and last cycle, and also future targets for a series of error measures. That includes percentage of cases with an error, percentage of cases with an improper payment, percentage of improper payments, average amount of improper payments, and estimated annual amount of improper payments. So it sounds like a lot of data, but most of it is set up for you in the OLDC. And I'll show you that on the next slide. And I know that there's a tip here on the bottom right. I'll come back to that in just a minute. So when you're in the OLDC, it's a table set up like this. And these three columns, prior cycle data, prior cycle target, and current cycle target, will all auto-populate for you based on your last report. And then the column for current cycle data will also auto-populate based on what you entered back in section 2. So really, the only column that you actually have to enter numbers in would be this last column, target for next cycle. And a couple of things to keep in mind as you set your targets. First, thinking about that fourth target, the target for average amount of improper payments, We obviously like to see reductions, but we also understand that this average may not necessarily go down from cycle to cycle. When you think about getting increased funding, raising payment rates for providers. So just take that into account when you're thinking about this item. And secondly, this very last target for estimated annual amount of improper payment, we like to see like some logic behind what number you come up with here. One way to think about it or to come up with this figure would be to take your error rate target, which in this case is 1.5, and multiply it by your annual amount of payments. You might not know what you probably will not know what your annual amount of payments will be 3 years from now, but you could use like this year's figure as an estimate. And going back to the previous slide, that's what I have. Oops, I'm sorry. That's what I have here in the yellow box. You can again take your target for percentage of improper payments, multiply it by your estimate of annual amount of CCDF payments or your current amount of CCDF payments to get that target. So that's item 23. We're almost done. In item 24, you'll be comparing your current cycle data to your current cycle targets. So you set your targets for this cycle 3 years ago. If any of those were not met, mention which ones and describe why they were not met. Also, refer to the action steps that you described in item 20 and tell us how they will be used to address the areas where the targets weren't met. And then the last item in the 404 report is item 25. And here you'll think back to the improper payment error causes identified in your last report from 3 years ago. Describe the action steps that were taken, whether the action steps reduced the error causes, how progress was measured, and any barriers that you faced. And this is another table set up in the OLDC. The first column will pre-populate based on what you entered for your error causes last cycle. And in the next column, you'll want to take a look at your 404 report from 3 years ago, specifically item 20. What were your planned action steps? Were they implemented fully? Was progress made towards full implementation? And if you had any additional actions that were not included on the report, you can also include those here. In the next column, did the action steps reduce the identified errors? You can simply say yes or no. How did you measure your progress in reducing the identified errors is the next column. Again, you can refer to item 20 in your 2022 report. So that might be a good starting point, but if what you did actually differed from your plans, you'll want to describe that here. And then in the last column, describe any barriers or setbacks in implementing the action steps. Maybe you did implement things, but you still did not see the intended results. You can include that here as well. And if you did not have any barriers, you can either say none, NA, leave it blank. All of those are fine. Hey, I don't see any questions. I know that this was a ton of information, but hopefully it's going to be helpful in completing your report. I did get a question really quick. Can you show the slide for number 22? Sure. That is the question on information systems. Did you have a specific question or you just want to take a look at it? Okay. All right. So the next part of the webinar, just a few minutes to talk about getting started in the OLDC. And again, the OLDC is used to submit the SDAP, so I think most of you are probably at least somewhat familiar with it. If you do have an account, you know, like for the SDAP and you plan to also go in to work on the 404, we would recommend that you test your access as soon as possible so that if there's any issues, they can be addressed well in advance of June 30th. You'll probably need to reset your password if you haven't gone in a little while. If anyone new or different requires access, or if your access needs to be, like your capabilities need to be changed, let us know. If it's like brand new, you know, you don't have access and you need to get access for the first time. I have the form with the handouts, and that can be returned to your ACF regional office. If you need any assistance with completing the form, you can reach out to your error rate specialist. We do recommend having a backup person that has the capability to certify and submit. Here's the address to access the OLDC. If you require any assistance with logging in and using it, you can reach out to your error rate specialist. We can try and help. If your question is more technical, then you'll probably want to reach out to the OLDC help desk at the address here. Okay. Yes, we got a question about the OLDC access. So it sounds like you submitted the request form for access. You haven't gotten an update, and of course, there's been some changes to the regions. Okay. Oh dear, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, we will look into that. We can look into it on our end to make sure that you get that access. I know things have been crazy, but yeah, Laura will follow up with you after this. Thanks for letting us know. All right, a few tips on using the OLDC. I think I mentioned this a while back, but just save your work because it does not save automatically. So we don't want you to fill everything in and then have your computer crash and have to redo everything. We recommend having a backup copy of your 404 in a Word document. You should just be able to then copy and paste things over. Make sure that you are entering your report in the correct period on the OLDC. It should be 2023 to 2024. And again, if you put it in the wrong period, unfortunately, you are going to have to just complete the report from scratch in the correct one. So we don't want you to have to do that. Before you're able to submit, you'll need to click a button that says Validate. And this is going to happen like before you do the certification. When you validate, you'll get a list of issues, if there are any. Some of these are considered warnings, which you should read and address if necessary, but the report can still be submitted. If there are any errors, those must be fixed before submission. And if you get any warnings or errors and you're not quite sure what to do, again, that's something that we can help you with. And our last tip is that once you've submitted, the report will be locked for editing. If you do need to make changes, we will need to release the report on our end, and then the designee would need to go in, unsubmit, and uncertify. And that is done from the report status screen. And again, a lot of this is similar to when you entered your STAP, very similar procedures. Right, so next steps for the year 3 states. We are going to have office hours, a couple of sessions in the next few weeks. I will get invites out shortly. And office hours are an informal session where you can just drop in to ask questions. If you don't have any questions, you can still join to listen in. We're not presenting anything. There won't be new information, but you can just drop in at any time. And that will be June 5th and then again on June 26th, both at 3 Eastern, and run an hour, so from 3 to 4 Eastern. TA can review your draft report before you submit it. In fact, we do highly recommend this. If there's any issues, we can usually catch those before you submit. And it usually means you'll get approved quicker. So if you wish to send us a draft, we just ask that you give us a few days to review it. If you ask us to review it on June 30th, we may or may not actually have time to do it. We also offer a just-in-time training, which is a one-on-one TA session on completing your report and entering into the OLDC. We'll schedule about an hour with your state. It's pretty informal, like you can use the time to go through your 404 responses and get assistance with entering into the OLDC or navigating the OLDC. If you are interested in taking us up on that, just reach out to your error rate specialist. And even if you don't think you need like a whole just-in-time training, but you just have questions here and there about the report, again, contact us and we'll help you. Right, so again, if you need to request OLDC logins or if you are having any other issues with OLDC access, you would want to get in touch with the regional office, then complete your ACF-404 report, request TA if needed, and submit by the end of June. We do have an evaluation for this webinar. I know if you've been on these previous cohort calls, we usually have it just pops up as you're leaving the webinar. It's a little bit different now that we're in Zoom. We have a link for it. So I'm going to ask one of my colleagues to put that link in the chat. And if you could take a moment to complete that evaluation, I would really appreciate it. I will also send a follow-up email with that link if you are not able to do the evaluation right now. Thanks, Tamara. It's just a few questions, should only take about like 5 minutes to complete the evaluation. Here is the contact information for your error rate specialist. You just find your state on there and we have either Mike, Tamara, or Danielle that can help you out. And if you have any general follow-up questions from the webinar, you can reach out to me. My address is right there, kwatts@wrma.com. And I'm going to leave the webinar on for a few more minutes. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And again, if you are able to complete the evaluation at this time, I appreciate it. But thank you so much for your time today. I know it's a ton of information, and we look forward to working with all of you to get these reports in successfully. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.